Welcome. 1 minute here. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I am Faith Taylor, Director of the Center on Global Human Trafficking, and I'm proud, very proud, to introduce Mimi Feliciano, who I've worked with for almost the last 2 years in developing the center. Mimi is the founder and CEO of Fem Real Estate, a company that develops, owns, and manages commercial real estate nationwide. Also, she is an advisory board member of MSU and the Mimi and Edwin Feliciano School of Business board member. She's also the founding member of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship and has numerous accolades, from being part of the New Jersey Business Hall of Fame, the best 50 women in business in New Jersey, and the top 25 leading women entrepreneurs. I'd like to welcome Mimi Feliciano. We need to unmute you. Wait. Come on. Let me see. Just giving us a minute to unmute Mimi. And Mimi, I think you have to turn on your volume there. Wait a minute. It's not on yet. Oh, okay. Mimi, you have to actually put on. Okay, there you go.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you, Faith. Sorry for that little mix up. Okay, I'm Mimi Feliciano, and I am the chairwoman of the Global Center on Human Trafficking at Montclair State University's advisory board. We have officially opened, and I am so excited and thrilled. It's been a journey. About 3 years ago, it started with a simple conversation with Dr. Cole and I talking about human trafficking today and what could we do in Montclair to combat it. What is there anything that I asked her that she could do? And she said, tell you the truth, she couldn't do anything, but she could ask her faculty if they would be interested in doing something. She said, I'll tell you what, I'll send out a memo to everyone and see who's interested. Well, we got 30 people minimum right off the bat. And the exciting thing was that they weren't just from one particular part of the university. They were from criminal justice, law enforcement, entrepreneurship, journalism, social services, business. They came from everywhere. And that was great. And they decided that they wanted to do something and that they were all in, whatever we wanted to do. And they gave their time for 2 years. And they decided to call themselves the MIGHT team, which stands for, it's an acronym for Montclair Interested Group on Human Trafficking. And this mighty team had a lot of small but might, and they've done a lot of great things with a lot of governmental agencies, federal and state, and large civic organizations. And they also involved the Bonner students and other students at Montclair, doing awareness programs, building relationships, and doing a lot of significant work. It appeared that not only were these things very productive and successful, that we felt that we could do even have a bigger role. And we decided to officially have a center. And that is what we're announcing today. And one of our key pillars is for education, awareness, and training. And we decided that we wanted to have a global role and have a strategic impact on this issue. And the point and the reason is because you can't do this kind of thing locally. This is a international problem. So we have to be in this together. So we decided we're going to open the center, and one of our main, as part of education, we decided to do this webinar today, and I'm very excited to have it. We have Monique Villa, who's an author, an expert on the subject of human trafficking, and she wrote a book called Slaves Among Us. And I would like to introduce our moderator for the panel today, and that would be Dr. Arnaud Kurtz. And he is a associate professor here at Montclair State University in Justice Studies. And he is a founding member of the MIGHT team. He's also been appointed as a global fellow from the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. from 2016 to 2020. His specialty was youth resilience in North Africa and also the Middle East. He has published widely in academic journals and has also produced reports for foreign affairs and government and international organizations. So I am thrilled to turn this over to Dr. Kurth, and I thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you so much, Mimi, for your lovely introductory remarks, and thank you, Faith, for helping to make this event possible, particularly by reaching out to Monique, our author, and inviting her for today. And of course, thank you to all of the invisible hands for everyone that really has played an essential role in making this event possible. It's only so fitting with regards to today's topic. And it's my really great honor and pleasure to welcome all of our participants who are here today, but also our guests. And this will be sort of a roundtable conversation based on Monique's first book, Slaves Among Us. And as Mimi already said, it sort of tackles big questions of human trafficking in today's world and looks also at the challenges that we have when we're trying to fight it. And particular because impunity often still looms large in many countries, providing an open field for those engaged in trafficking activities. It's an incredible attempt, I believe, of raising awareness and shedding light to these lesser known issues of trafficking. We'll hear about the origins of Monique's book, listen to her stories, but more importantly, the stories of lesser heard voices entangled in this web of repression, violence, and abuse of power. Monique is a former CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, but again, more importantly, she's also a journalist at heart, which has helped her tremendously in interviewing her protagonists and writing up the stories. She's today joined by her friend and colleague, Martina Vandenberg, the founder and president of the Human Trafficking Legal Center, which is an organization dedicated to providing pro bono counsel to trafficking survivors. Moreover, she's also been a former Human Rights Watch researcher, where she spearheaded investigations into human rights violations, such as in the Russian Federation, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Uzbekistan, Kosovo, Israel, and the Ukraine. Given her extensive experience as a lawyer, she'll help us understand some of the legal challenges associated with fighting impunity. Again, welcome Monique and Martina, and thank you for joining us today. Before we start, AJ, who you've met and who is managing the tech side of things today, we'll try to send out a link in the chat for general advice on how to raise your hand or ask a question for those who are not yet veterans in Zoomlandia, right? There might still be people out there who need a helping hand. But so although we'll engage in a less formal conversation that I pointed out earlier, which will be really supported by a lot of questions from the students, we'll try to have a two-part format where in the first part, Monique will tell her story about the origins of her work, of course, also providing us with an overview about important numbers and facts about global human trafficking. And that will be then followed by sort of a conversation on how we can sort of fight some of these challenges that exist, and by ending it with a Q&A questions that our acting director of the Center for Global Human Trafficking will lead, Faith Taylor. So I want to start things off by taking one of our students' questions, which is Leah Fitzgerald, a Justice Studies major at the College for Humanities and Social Sciences. And she's one of my students, also interning currently for me. And she was really wondering when she was reading a compelling work, Monique, and where you sort of really describe these different faces of the victims. And here I quote, the way you write about these lived stories, the pain and the resilience of victims, made me think of the need of raising awareness about these issues in a more maybe cinematographic format. So are there any plans of potentially turning that work into a picture, maybe a movie, a series, or a documentary? On that note, I'll hand it over to Monique, who will introduce us to sort of these global issues from her perspective and her stories. And the floor is all yours. Thank you for joining us again, both of you.
Thank you, Arno. Very kind, very nice, and that's an interesting question indeed, because I have friends who told me this should be a series because it's such a human story that it would shed light on this issue in a much bigger way than just a book. How large is the audience of the book? So first, I wanted to congratulate all the students who are here tonight, because it's not easy to come to a conversation on slavery. So it means that you probably have a conscience. And it means also that we have something probably in common, which is empathy for the victims and a strong desire for action and to stop the evil of slavery. It's the worst of all human crime. And God knows there are many kinds of human crime, but what could be worse than to transfer someone into a commodity and a slave at all times? So when I discovered human trafficking and modern day slavery 12 years ago, I was taken aback by my ignorance and by the ignorance of all my friends and even the journalists and everybody I knew on that issue. And the main reason, one of the reasons, but one big reason, it is that it is a silent crime. It is, you cannot find a slave who says, oh, hey, I'm a slave, please help me. They can't. They would be beaten up. They would be put forever in a dark corner, etc., etc. They can't say anything. And they walk among us. You can very well be seated beside a slave on a plane. You could very well tip a maid in a hotel, and she's a slave, and you don't know. You have no way to know, because she looks like the others. They look like the others. They're just like us, but they live in a very different world. And it's really striking, this invisibility of slavery, when you think that officially, that is to say, according to the UN and the International Labour Organization, there are 40.3 million slaves in the world today, as we speak. According to most specialists, there could be a lot more. And I'm speaking of 100 million, maybe 200 million slaves in the world. We don't know. We don't have the data. It's very difficult to go from anecdotes to data and to have real data. I was once in India in Kailash Satyarthi ashram. Kailash Satyarthi is the Nobel Prize who received the Nobel Prize because he has rescued so many children in India from slavery. And we were discussing, and I asked, how many children do you think are slaves in India? And he told me, probably 30 million. 30 million, officially there are 5 millions. And officially, there are 40 million total slaves in the world. So if already you have 30 million children slaves in India, it means you have a lot more adults and you have a lot more slaves than 40 million globally. But once again, we don't know, and this is speculation. But what is striking is that this is a very big business. And this is a very big business that the ILO, that is to say the UN, says it represents $150 billion profit every year. So pure profit, because you have people who are not paid well, almost not paid. I mean, the modern slavery is an umbrella world for domestic servitude, forced labor, and human trafficking. The definition of a modern slave is someone forced to work through fraud or through violence or threat of violence for no pay beyond subsistence. That is to say, that costs very little to the employer. The best specialists think that there are 30% slaves working in sex trafficking, and this is growing. Because it's more and more easy to sell people now online and in many different ways. 30% are sex slaves, and 70% work in conditions of forced labor. And they do all that the slavers do all that in total impunity, not total, but almost. I mean, in 2018, there were only 7,138 convictions in the world of people who had trafficked other people.
So
which
Monique,
means, yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
if you don't, no, that's perfect. If you don't mind me interrupting, because we have a very fitting question with regards to sort of you described this as a business model, especially when we think about labor trafficking. And one of our student, Patrice Fisher, a psychology major at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, was wondering, I mean, she limited it to sex trafficking, but as you said, what are some of the tools? If you say it is a business model, what are the tools that these traffickers use to recruit their victims? Could you explain that a little further?
I will explain that. I will explain. If you let me finish on
impunity.
impunity.
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah.
this is impunity, and we will come back with Martina on that, but because she's a specialist of that, because she has defended people who had been trafficked to get compensation for them once they are freed from the people who traffic them. So she knows a bit about it. But the reason there is such an impunity, and on this 7,000 more or less conviction, you had only 250 for forced labor. All the other convictions were for sex trafficking, which is the smallest part. Okay, so the reason why is that it is very difficult to prove for prosecutors, and I've discussed that with many prosecutors, and I've worked at length with Cyrus Vance, with the Manhattan District Attorney, and many others. It's very difficult to prove instance of slavery. So that's why there are so little number of convictions. But now that I've given you the numbers, you like the numbers, but you remember the stories. So I'm going to very quickly speak of the stories of the three remarkable human beings that are the biggest part of my book, because it is their story in their own language, so in their own words. I did this book because I created a conference on human trafficking called Trust Women, and then Trust Conference. And every year we took very big actions on trafficking. One was to organize a system of banks alliance to force the banks to look at the credit card data of their clients and see when there were a pattern of human trafficking. We worked on that with Martina. And Cyrus Vance was co-hosting the working group with me. The second was the Stop Slavery Award, that was to create for companies the will to clean their supply chain and be honored for that when they did it, to clean their supply chain from forced labor. And this is very complicated because there is not one company, one big company in the world who can say, I'm slavery free. So it's a big issue. So this is what we did at this conference, taking action. But we started all the conferences since 2012 by listening to survivors who would tell their stories. And among all their survivors, the three who were the most extraordinary in the sense that they could explain very well why they fall prey to trafficking, what happened during the years they were slaves, and how they could escape and rebuild their lives after. So that's the story of three individuals. And the traffickers took them. You ask the business model of traffickers, they take you at your most vulnerable. So you're most vulnerable because of your infancy, because of your total poverty, and you would be, if you are a Syrian father today in a camp, and someone offers you a job, you take it because you want to give food to your family and give an education to your children. So when you are very vulnerable, you have all these traffickers that are there ready to act. And so I tell the story of three people. One is an American woman. She lives in Ohio. She's white. She's called Jennifer Campton. And she was trafficked when she was 25. She had a difficult childhood. She had been abused, etc. And her life was already difficult at 25. And then she has this extraordinary meeting with a man who falls in love with her, and he's Prince Charming. He's a wonderful guy. They have a perfect bliss for 8 months. 8 months during which she becomes completely madly in love with him, and he addicts her to heroin and other drugs, and then after 8 months puts her on the turf, and she becomes a slave, and then he sells her to different gangs, etc., etc. All this in Ohio, very close to where you all live, and in a country you would not think of white women enslaved for 6 years. She escaped. The second one is Dipendra Giri. And this is also very interesting. He's a man. He's a Nepalese man. He's very well educated because he's a professor in his country, in his village. He teaches children he's a teacher. But he creates his family. He's 29. He has a daughter. He wants more children, and he needs to make a little bit of money to educate his family. So he looks for a job. No jobs in Nepal, and he goes. It's the poorest country in Asia, and he sees this advertising for a job in Qatar as a clerk in an office. So he thinks that's ideal for me. So he's a candidate. He speaks a rather good English. He's chosen among many candidates, and he flies to Qatar. But before flying to Qatar, he has to go through intermediaries, the ones who find his job, the one who give the job, the one who organized the trip to Qatar. And he puts himself in a situation of debt bondage. Debt bondage is that in order to be able to pay his plane ticket and to go there, he has to take a loan. And he takes a loan with someone who presents a loan which seems fair. And this person who has signed the loan with him during the day comes back at night and tell him, look, this is not the real loan. The real loan is this one that you are going to sign now. And the interest rate is 60%. 60% is, of course, an enormous interest rate. You can never refund. And this is how he fell, even before going to Qatar, into debt bondage. Then he flies to Qatar, he arrives, and instead of having a job in an office, he's put on a construction site, his passport is taken away, and the kafala system is applied to him. And the kafala system, which exists in all the countries in the Gulf and in Saudi Arabia and in Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan. And this is a system of sponsorship by which the migrant worker is put at the total mercy of their employers from their visa to enter the country until their exit visa. So if Dipendra says, but I didn't come here to be a slave. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to go. He can't. He has no longer his passport and he has no exit visa. This is the way the kafala system works. And it's an abomination that should be suppressed. Okay, so Dipendra, after 2.5 years, succeed to leave Qatar to come back because his grandmother was very sick and he had to see her. So they give him a holiday. And of course, he never comes back to Qatar. He has been, in a kind of way, that rather lucky because I invited him to speak at my conference, and he came to the conference, explained under anonymity what had happened to him, and a lady in the audience that I didn't know came to me and said, do you think I could help this gentleman and help him with his debt? And I said, well, sure. So we went into a room, the three of us, and I saw the most extraordinary thing that I've ever seen in my life. Someone so generous that she was ready to pay whatever was his debt. So she asked him, what is your debt? And Dipendra said, $4,000. And we were thinking, oh my God, more or less everybody in this room in London could, between us, give him the money, but we thought it would be a lot more. So this lady, she doesn't want me to give her name, so I will not. I call her M in the book. Tells him, look, I will give you $10,000, and then you come back to Nepal, you create your business, and you stay with your family as a free man. So he does exactly that, and he created an NGO. So that's the story of Dipendra Giri. And the third person is a woman called Marcella Loiza. She lives in Colombia, in Latin America. And she's a single mother, and her daughter, who is still a baby, is very sick. So she needs money to be able to pay the hospital and everything. And a guy tells her, you dance so well, I'm going to make you an international dancer. And he takes her, she trusts him, she was very vulnerable. She follows him to Tokyo. And in Tokyo, she's in the hands of the Yakuza mafia. It turns her into a prostitute and also in debt bondage because she had to refund the debt to pay her travels, etc. So the same principle. And she's there. The three of them have never seen their slaver condemned or arrested. Never. This is usually the case. The three of them, when they left, went through extreme PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, were, unable to pay for good psychiatrists, etc., because you don't have any money when you have been a slave for 6 years or 3 years or 2 years and a half. You don't have anything. You rely on the good NGOs in the front line who help you. And so all this allows me in this book to tell the story, also the story of the business, and also the story of the slaver of Jennifer, who still live in Ohio, free, never been arrested. He has been arrested once or twice, but never condemned. And he still lives there, and he still traffics girls. I mean, this is extraordinary. This happened not at the full hand of Africa, but in the United States.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And I think anyone who has not read Monique's book fully, please grab a copy. It is really compelling. I mean, it speaks to you because these narratives really tell the story of these individuals. And I think what you've pointed out here with all these different case studies, there are very much intrinsic, sometimes institutional or systemic challenges. And one of our students was wondering, Andrea Resbala from Public Relations at the School of Communication and Media, she wanted to know what other major challenges there exist. And I think that might be also a great segue into sort of the areas that you just mentioned, impunity, and they're still walking around freely. And that ties in with the rule of law, where we have another expert here, Martina, right? And so I think if you want to take the first stab at the question, Monique, and then hand it over to Martina, that would be great.
A lot of aspects, of course, on slavery. You have the mental health. You have I didn't speak of that, but you have today more migrants than ever in history. You have more slaves than ever in history. You have more migrants than ever in history. These migrants go through trajectories now which are absolutely mad, and they very often fall prey to traffickers, smugglers, traffickers, etc. Sometimes you see 30 Vietnamese dead in a lorry arriving in England. And these were future slaves to work on in nail salon, in many other places, in London, etc. So it has penetrated all kind of places in society, in all our countries. In India, of course, where you have the most slaves in the world. In China, where the whole jail system, all the prison system in China is organized around forced labor. That is to say, the prisoners are forced to work and are not paid, of course, and have impossible quotas to reach, and they are beaten every night because they don't reach the quotas, etc. It's a huge issue. China is the second country in the world for slavery. And then you have all the fishermen on boats, you know, in Thailand, who are fishing the fish we eat. I mean, I cannot buy a frozen fish since I know that most of the fishermen in Thailand are slaves and are never paid, etc., etc. So it has penetrated the supply chains of all our companies and everything we touch. I mean, the garments we wear, we don't know who has done it, who has done the cotton, who has done, etc., etc. So it's a massive issue that businesses start to address, thanks also to some laws, you know, in the US, as in the UK, as in France. Some very strong laws have started to appear that force companies to tell on a website what they do regarding cleaning their supply chain. But they know very well that whatever they do is not enough, and we all know it. So, you know, it's a huge issue. And the question of impunity is, of course, at the center of that. There would not be that many million slaves today, as we speak now, if there was not almost total impunity on their gains. Martina, how do you explain it?
So first, let me just say thank you for inviting me. And as you have all figured out by now, Monique is a force of nature. And so she is absolutely the perfect person to launch your center. So congratulations on launching the center today as well. So this question of impunity is one that my colleagues and I have spent the last 2 decades grappling with. And just as Monique said, almost no one is prosecuted, and particularly for forced labor. So just to even look at the next year, the 2019 data, there were only 939 prosecutions, not even convictions, 939 prosecutions in the entire world for forced labor. So what we've realized is that forced labor in global supply chains is a feature, not a bug. Monique is completely correct. The entire system is tainted with forced labor, and the system is designed to create exploitation of workers through recruiting fees, through debt bondage, through all of the mechanisms that Monique has explained. But I want to sort of shine a light on the occasional decent case where the government does the right thing. It happens rarely, but every once in a while. And lucky for you, all of you in Montclair, it happened literally just down the street in New Jersey. So there was just a conviction in New Jersey, in Hudson County, in the federal court. The victim was held in Woodland Park and Secaucus. The victim was a domestic worker. Again, Monique has talked about the vast majority of these trafficking cases around the world being people held in forced labor. And one important and vicious subset of that is domestic workers. In this particular case, it was a domestic worker from Sri Lanka who was brought to the United States and held in forced labor for 10 years. She was forced to marry the trafficker in order to keep her in the United States. She was forced to take care of 3 children. She slept in the sort of common area, and she was not paid. So that case somehow came to light to the federal authorities, to the US Attorney's Office in New Jersey. They prosecuted the case, and that particular defendant was sentenced to 70 months in prison. Now, that case is currently on appeal, but it's an example, but a rare example, because even in the United States, we don't see forced labor prosecutions very often. In fact, last year, there were 12 forced labor prosecutions at the federal level in the entire country. And so as a lawyer representing victims, what we do is look for alternatives. And one of the alternatives is strategic litigation. One of the alternatives is civil litigation. So if the government won't bring a victim's case to court, then that victim can bring her case to court herself with the assistance of a pro bono lawyer and fight for damages. Again, she can't put anyone in prison, but she can collect back wages and damages from the perpetrator.
This requires a lot of courage from the survivor of trafficking.
It's so true. It's so true. It's a long process. And if you can imagine, one of my colleagues once joked that doing a lawsuit is like inviting a wild animal to live with you in your house. It's there at breakfast, it's there at lunch, it's there at dinner. So Monique is absolutely right. It takes an enormous amount of courage for trafficking survivors to bring civil cases, but they do, and they win.
I mean,
So-
Martina and I, we know very well. One of the only ones I know, survivor who saw a trafficker condemned. This is Evelyn Chambeau. It's in the US also. She comes from Cameroon in Africa. She was trafficked when she was 9 by an uncle who sold her in a family in Maryland, in the United States, where she became a slave and dealt with the children. And she was there until she was 18, never going out of the house, beaten by the woman. I mean, horrendous conditions. When she's 18, she escapes. She runs to the church at the corner of the street, and it's a Catholic church, and they take her and they deal with her and they help her never come back. And she's strong enough to sue her slaver. And the slaver has been condemned and is still in jail, which is remarkable. And so Evelyn is one of my heroes. She has come to many of my conferences, etc., like Martina did. And she, I asked her, do you feel better because your trafficker has been condemned? And she said, you know what? No. Because I'm so sad for the 2 children who were my children, that their mother is in jail, that I cannot even be satisfied. So it's also very interesting, all the aspects of this crime, which is slavery, where you can never find the right solution.
Thanks, Martina and Monique. And I think on that note, both of you sort of expressed sort of the workings on the grounds when it comes to applying the rule of law, expanding it, finding different remedy mechanisms. And one of our students who is also a public relations major at the School of Communication and Media, Madeleine Lezen, would like to know what sort of related or other remedies do we have to end human trafficking with regards to the rule of law, but others as well. When we look, for instance, at Latin America or Central America and US or in Asia, because we've done really a tour around the globe, wherever you feel comfortable, or if you have any insights on that, I think Madeleine would be greatly appreciative of that.
I think, there are no great recipe because, as we said, very few people have been condemned and convicted. So there are very few. But the more you are aware, and this is why Martina and I always shed light on the crime as much as we can everywhere in the world, it's because once you have opened your eyes, you can see things that you would not have seen before and notice things that you never noticed before. For instance, once someone noticed doing the washing up at 2 o'clock in the morning after the friends had left the house in the kitchen. In the kitchen opposite, a very, very young child doing the washing up. And they thought, oh, that's bizarre, etc. They went to the police and said it, and the police investigated, and it was a case of trafficking. And this happens here and there when people pay attention and then move and say something. Open your mouth, open your eyes, go and do what you can. We are all consumers. We buy our t-shirt, we buy our things. So as I said, it's impossible to buy somewhere where you are 100% sure that, it is totally slave-free. But you can have suspicion looking at where it comes from, etc., etc. You can be an informed consumer. Mm-hmm. And then you start a movement. If you enter Tiffany and you say, can you tell me, I love this ring. Can you tell me where the stone comes from? Is it certified, etc.? They will answer you because they are ready to that. They know they can be asked. But the others one in the shop can very well think, why does she ask that? what is it with diamond or with a stone, whatever it is, or gold or silver, you know? So be an intelligent consumer, ask questions and open your eyes. It's already a start, but then there are many other ways. Martina, you can speak of many. Today, there was a very interesting case at the Supreme Court. What happened? I had no time to watch it.
Yeah,
Did you?
I've been on calls all day and watched heard the oral argument this morning before the Supreme Court, and the case involves children who allege that they were trafficked from Mali to Cote d'Ivoire and held in child slavery on cocoa plantations that are used to produce cocoa for huge US corporations. And so the two corporations that were the defendants in the case pending before the Supreme Court today are Nestle and Cargill. And those two corporations argued that there should be no liability, that there should be no responsibility civilly for aiding and abetting those crimes. So they deny the allegations. They say they hate child slavery. But they simply say that corporations shouldn't be held accountable. Only individuals can be held accountable. So this is an enormous problem. And it's also, I think, wrong because Congress has made law in the United States. This particular case is under a separate law, but Congress has made law in the United States saying that corporations can be held accountable.
Yep.
They can be held accountable criminally. They can be held accountable civilly, so in a civil court for damages, for trafficking crimes, even if those crimes occur abroad, even if those crimes are in supply chains. And so Congress has weighed in on this and has made excellent laws. The problem that we have is not the law. The problem that we have is enforcement and implementation. Because even though Congress gave the prosecutors literally a vehicle to hold corporations accountable for forced labor and supply chains, guess how many cases there have been with extraterritorial jurisdiction alleging that sort of forced labor? The answer is 0. And that law has been on the books for more than a decade. And so we cannot trust states to do this. So that brings us back, because the students are asking such excellent questions. These are really the questions that get to the heart of this matter. You know, trafficking, when we talked about it, when we were negotiating the Palermo Protocol or when we were passing the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 1999 and 2000, everyone talked about the 3 Ps: prosecution, prevention, and protection. And I have to be honest, over the last 20 years, we have focused on 1 P. We have focused on prosecution and practically nothing else. And there is a growing realization within the movement that prosecution is the wrong P to focus on. It's not that we should obliterate it or defenestrate it or eliminate it entirely.
It doesn't work.
It's still important. But the point is we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. The P that is most neglected, and the P that I think is the one that will now receive much, much more attention, is prevention. And 2 things that I would just point to briefly on prevention. Number 1, how do we prevent forced labor? We empower workers. That means workers have the right to create unions. That means workers have a voice. That means workers have complaint mechanisms. So empowering workers and trying to prevent forced labor by making sure that labor exploitation is not permitted and not tolerated, I think that's the first step. And that's really a matter of workers being able to strike and being able to have freedom of association. The second thing I'll say is on the sex trafficking side. One of the huge problems that we have in the United States, but not just here, is the foster care system. Because the foster care system does not protect children. We have cases in New York, we have cases in Florida of children who are held in group homes, children who are held in facilities, and then the people who run the facilities actually traffic them out for forced prostitution. These are teenagers.
The same happens in orphanages all over the world.
Absolutely. So
I mean, when you good student want to be a volunteer, and go and help for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and very often they propose you orphanages, hesitate really, because most of the time you will not help the children there. You probably help traffickers to show a good shop window.
It's exactly right. J.K. Rowling started an entire organization called Lumos to try and stop orphanage voluntourism, which Monique's right, it causes great harm because many of those children in those orphanages aren't actually orphans.
They come back and they want to see their mother, you know, but they cannot say it to the visitors, of course.
Yeah. Oh, those are some great insights. Thanks for sharing those. And just last week, I did bring in guest speakers also from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. So the labor trafficking issues were right up front and center. And as Monique said, get engaged, right? When you have an opportunity to intern. And so here again, if we'll provide certainly information material to our students to keep their eyes open, but also engage wherever they can. We've come to the last part of our section where we'll open it up for a broader Q&A. And it's my great pleasure to bring back on the podium, or our virtual podium, the acting director of our center, Faith Taylor. And we'll give her a second to unmute her mic, and she'll take it from there, because not only have we gotten dozens of questions through the registration process, but also here through our participation, we've had a chat and Q&A that is filled with questions. Unfortunately, we won't get to all of them, but I hope Faith had a moment to sift through some of them, and we'll be good to go. So on that note, Faith, unfortunately, she has some technical issues with her video, but she will read out the questions and moderate the debate here.
No problem. We'll just keep moving. So one of the questions by Annabella Poland, she's with the business school, and she asked the question, has the pandemic helped reduce the number of human trafficking cases? So I think I heard you talk a little bit about it, but what's going on today? Go ahead.
It's sadly a lot worse. You know, you imagine what happens in refugee camps, for instance, with the pandemic, when they are closed in the camps, etc. And so the traffic and the sex trafficking and the sale of very young girls for wedding, or, you know, one-day wedding, etc., have increased considerably during the pandemic. And it's very difficult to say the numbers because we don't know, but from all the NGOs on the world, on the ground, we know it. And I was discussing today at another panel at lunchtime, my time, in London. I was discussing with NGOs on the ground, and especially one who deals with Yazidi in Iraq, etc. And the situation is worse than ever with the COVID. That's what I hear. I don't know very well for the US, Martina, maybe you have more information, but.
So the worry that we have is that so much of this is now locked behind closed doors and invisible. I mean, we've certainly seen a surge in domestic violence. I think people are extremely concerned with domestic violence. By the same token, the other people who are locked in those houses are domestic workers. And so we are panicked about what we will see, not just in the United States, but in the Gulf countries and all around the globe, in terms of abuse of domestic workers and forced labor for domestic workers who are literally not allowed to leave their employers' houses. The other thing I'll say, though, about the pandemic is I would argue that we are seeing the largest global wage theft in history. Because all of these brands, all of these big corporations that make a big deal about being transparent, I'm so skeptical of transparency, because what they did at the first sign of trouble when the stores started closing was cancel, not the orders had been done, they canceled payments. And so you had workers who had toiled in these factories and then did not get paid. So I think when someone like the World Bank—
happened massively in Bangladesh, for instance.
Yeah, all over the world. So the other piece of this is, you know, a lot of people are working at home. People who are, you know, desk workers have it fairly cushy and can stay fairly safe. The other thing that COVID has done is forced essential workers to take enormous risks, right?
Yes.
And the ILO has even talked about the fact that doing work, being forced to work without protective equipment, could be a form of forced labor, right? It could actually be a death sentence. And so we have examples. Well, just say real quick, we have one example in Malaysia of workers who are making gloves. They're making rubber gloves that are exported to London, to the NIH, and they're exported here to the United States. And the workers who are migrant workers on those supply chains making the gloves so that we can all survive this pandemic are allegedly being held in forced labor and debt bondage.
And just on that note, I have a niece who's working at Amazon, and so her shift ends at 12:30 at night, and they are randomly told that you will work an additional hour with no additional pay, and if you don't do it, you will be docked. And I told her, I said, this is a form of forced labor. This is right here in New Jersey, the Amazon distribution center, and they are taking advantage. You know what I mean? And I'm sitting here listening to her, and I was like, you are kidding me, right? And, Amazon's trying to act like, we're trying to fulfill all these orders, blah, blah, blah. But what they're doing
Although, to
is,
come back to what Martina was saying, there are
yes,
unions in Amazon. So
yeah,
what do we do?
right.
But think of what has happened in India with the pandemic, when Modi, the prime minister, has said to all populations, go back to your village. People who have no place to live.
Right.
So who were on the road, could not eat, could not sleep, were sleeping rough, etc., etc. This is a fantastic opportunity for traffickers. They were all begging for a job, for anything to have a cover. So yes, it will be certainly a very negative effect, Annabelle. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is really, yeah. So, and then I have Amun Mahmood. He's also a business administration major, and he's asking, and you talked a little bit, but what can corporations really do to combat human trafficking? Because I came out of that world, and I understand that, the challenges of, if you're having, let's say I was in the hospitality industry and you're having sheets made in Pakistan, and how do you ensure that there is no labor trafficking associated with that? So what are some of the things, because I know, Monique, you also were giving awards to companies, and I agree with you, this is not perfect at all. But what can companies do? What can they do?
Nothing is perfect. That is to say, the Stop Slavery Award that I created with Anish Kapoor, the artist, who is of Indian origin, was to give to corporations who were best in class to try to clean their supply chain from forced labor. Not that they were clean, because nobody's clean, okay? So you cannot give slavery-free awards. But then you had a jury, which was a very, very serious jury with, the head of Human Rights Watch, Ken Roth, the Kailash Satyarthi, the Nobel Prize, and all people very special, John Ruggie from, the Business Principles at the UN, etc., who were members of this jury. And every year we received so many candidates, and we went through tons of questions. Nobody was slave-free, that's obvious. But you have companies like Adidas who received the prize. Adidas received it with the congratulations of the jury, because they are so deep into knowing exactly what happens in the second tier of the supply chain, and even in the third tier. So they were doing an exemplary work. Apple, interestingly, was candidate the first year. They didn't get it at all, because they had massive issues in China,
yes,
and elsewhere. They called me after and said, "Can you explain why?" In that case, it was the first winner was HP. Why HP received the award and not us? And I said, well, because they're 10 times better than you, and for this and that reason. They worked so much on their supply chain that 3 years after, when they were candidate again, they received the award with all these guys in the jury giving them for the progress they had made. Not that they were clean, they are still not clean at all. But they made so much progress, so much effort, paid so many $1 million to compensate workers that had been flawed, etc., that it was quite remarkable. So you can do a lot of things. You can really, put ethics at the center of everything you do at the company. You have to do that. And then check. And don't think, we will take an auditing house and they will do the audits and we don't care, because the audits are always so poor, so outrageous, that you don't want that. You want a lot more to make sure that you clean your supply chain. So very few people do it, but more and more do it. And hopefully, little by little, with the consumers interested, I have grandchildren. They tell me, I want Nike. And I say, no, you will have Adidas, because I'm sure they don't use sleeves. And that's it, and we have to react like that way. Yeah.
So it's so good.
Not that I'm sure that Nike has sleeves. I don't know.
Okay. Go ahead, Martina. As we wrap up, can you please, and then I'd like to thank you. Go ahead, Martina.
So I'll just jump in very quickly, because it's so welcome to have so many students from the business school on this Zoom call and webinar. Companies need to treat forced labor like they now treat bribery, right? Bribery used to be ubiquitous. It used to be tax-free in Germany. You could write your bribes off on your business income taxes. But now, if someone pays a bribe, that allegation goes straight to the chairman of the board and the C-suite, and everyone is distressed, and they immediately jump into action and figure out who paid the bribe, and they fix it. We don't have that same motivation with human trafficking and with forced labor. And so I want companies to treat forced labor like bribery. I also want them to stop lobbying against laws to stop forced labor. So Apple is in the New York Times this week lobbying against a new law that would prevent the importation of goods made by people held in forced labor who are Uyghurs in the Xinjiang territories. And Apple is, along with other corporations, lobbying to block that law. So if they want to take on the mantle of ethical behavior, then they absolutely cannot stop the train of accountability.
Wow. And it's interesting, Martina, what you said about their cover-up is basically that, we work with contractors that are certified, and we don't know this, right? And so it's like they play the chicken game with sort of in legal terms. And that's
the reason why I must say we gave the Stop Slavery Award only for 1 year to the company, because you have to prove again that you are still good, because you know very well that this kind of things happen.
Wow, what a powerful, powerful conversation. I know that we could go on for another hour, and I really want to thank Monique Villa and your book. Everyone, please read it, but we're excited about the documentary. Martina Vandenberg, we look forward to actually having you back with the documentary. Martina, in terms of your commitment to continue with prosecution, it's humbling to hear the numbers, which are just zero. In my mind, it's not even a 0.001% of prosecutions. It's horrible. So your work for the decades is absolutely, it's humbling. That's all I have to say. It's humbling. Thank you so much. And then we also have Arnaud, excellent moderator and co-founder of the center. And of course, Mimi Feliciano, who has been passionate and a huge advocate of the program. And I want to close it off by what Martina said, the 3 Ps where we should be focusing on: prosecution, prevention, and protection. And I totally agree with you that prevention is the only way that it's the root cause, where people are looking for a better life, where they're looking for jobs, where they're looking for love, but they're being abused. The invisible people, right?
So that there are things that probably everybody in the room can do. A lot of survivors go and speak to students, to pupils in schools, to say how they fell prey to traffickers. And please open your arms, don't fall prey, be careful, etc. And they also train the policemen, etc. So there is a lot of prevention done, and you can help that prevention happening also.
Yes, and that's what the Center on Global Human Trafficking is doing. We're developing programs, awareness, services, and we're very excited to have this conversation today. It will be on YouTube Live, and we will continue to have the conversation. Look forward to having you back with the documentary. So thank you, everybody. It's been an incredible journey. We appreciate everyone's support, and we look forward to talking with you further. Take care.
Everybody, thank you, Arno. Thank you, Faith.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Monique. Thanks, Martina.
Thank you very much.
Be well.
Thanks, Mark.
Happy holidays.
Be well, everyone.